It all started when a skeleton bowed to welcome the Underworld's king. This was the Lich Lord, accompanied by the Lich Queen. Preparations for the event were underway, and the king requested his son Drain. The moment had arrived to venture into the human realm. Drain, a human boy, approached his parents when they called, ready to leave. The cave understood. He had just turned 18 and seemed to have matured significantly. During the conflict with the Orc Lord, they stumbled upon him as a small child and took him in. It felt like fate. He had grown up in a realm of the dead, and they had become his new family. He was nurtured by those who had long since passed. Finding true happiness was a challenge. Yet, he was still human, and they wished for their son to experience life in the human world. The time had finally come for him to return to the human realm. Tears streamed down the queen's face as her beloved son prepared to leave. He was expected to feel heartbroken, but this was for Drain's benefit. They assured him he could always come back once he lost his life. It was hard to fathom that could happen in just a few years. Still, Drain smiled, believing the human world would be quite enjoyable. The two were taken aback by his optimism. The queen mentioned she had created the usual magical gate to transport him to the kingdom of Shawmark, a place of order and good people. The king reminded Drain that he remained the prince of the underworld. He must never forget that while on the surface. Above all, he should establish a kingdom of the dead on the surface. That was the fate of those with royal blood, destined to enslave humans in the future. Drain expressed gratitude to his parents for raising him as an orphan, wanting to convey those feelings. Leaving his weeping parents behind, Drain steeled himself for departure, even as they reminded him to take care, eat his vegetables, and that he could always return if things got tough. The magic activated, teleporting him far away while the king and queen watched. The king pondered if the destination was indeed correct. They chuckled when they realized they had miscalculated the location. Thus, he arrived in the Venisa Empire, right in a bandit hideout where screams echoed ominously. A girl cried out for help while a man gripped her face with one hand. He ordered her to be quiet, threatening that if she didn't, she'd only leave behind remains, all while planning to savor her presence. Behind him, another man cautioned against doing anything reckless. After all, the girl was still a valuable asset. As Mary screamed for help, she urged Lizzie Lee to save her, claiming she was her slave. Lizzie Lee felt anxious watching Mary suffer. She rushed to intervene. I was tossed aside. Mary protested, declaring her royal lineage. Such treatment was unforgivable and would never be excused. This only fueled the man's rage, as he despised the royal family and was ready to act. She kept pleading with Lizzie Lee for assistance, questioning why she stood idly by after being struck. Mary cried, begging for them to stop, but the man laughed, declaring it was too late. They would never save her. Suddenly, a bright light appeared behind the man. He jumped aside, bewildered by the occurrence. It was Drain who appeared, and though confused, he inquired if this was the land where kind people resided. At the very least, the man before him didn't seem kind at all, which quickly ignited the man's fury. Drain chuckled, assuring him not to worry about that, even as the other insisted he repeat it if he had the courage. He was told to leave, and Drain intended to comply, but was immediately commanded to halt and approach by the other man inside. They debated what to do with this unexpected arrival. He was far too suspicious to simply let go. They figured they should consult the boss first. They instructed Drain to wait quietly in the cell. Once alone, Drain glanced back and noticed the two girls were still present. He asked what kind of predicament this was, but he paused to think and soon realized they must be members of royalty kidnapped by bandits during their travels. He sighed, finding it truly pathetic, and asked Lizzie Lee if they weren't in the same dire situation. Mary complained about a noble being subjected to such treatment. She slapped Lizzie Lee across the face, blaming her, crying in frustration while the servant begged for forgiveness from her mistress. Those men referred to Mary as a product, planning to sell her to a foreign land through those miscreants. She wanted to escape immediately. Meanwhile, Lizzie Lee lamented their dire circumstances. Mary then turned to Drain, questioning what he was doing there, appearing out of nowhere. He explained it was through magical teleportation. Although he was meant to arrive in a garden, he ended up in this place instead, leaving Mary bewildered. After all, teleportation magic was a spell of sage level. Ordinary folks use that power without a second thought. Drain mentioned his mother wielded it daily for shopping. Impressive, right? Yet Mary remained upset by his casual tone. Lizardly, curious, asked if he could wield that power himself. He replied no, magic was beyond his reach. Mary's frustration flared again. Their last chance for escape had just vanished. That's when Drain suggested there was still another option. He proposed they could form a slave contract with him. Both were confused, and Mary questioned what he meant. With a grin, the protagonist elaborated. Their bodies and souls would belong to him, allowing for an immediate escape. What a fortunate coincidence, considering Triana was on the lookout for slaves. But then, others approached the cell, laughing. They found it amusing that slaves were creating more slaves. One of the monsters pointed out to his boss, indicating Drain, the boy who had appeared out of nowhere, thinking he could do as he pleased. The boss questioned what that meant, dismissing Train as a weakling, which made the protagonist chuckle. Meanwhile, Mary clutched the bars. She shouted for them to release her immediately. If they treated her with respect, the king would annihilate them. Yet, her royal status only amused the leader. She seemed like a fine product. With enough training, she could become an even better asset. Mary stepped back, realizing they were preparing tentacles. She recognized the monster. It had an aphrodisiac effect, quite useful for training. Thanks to those tentacles, their slaves would obey. Customers had even praised the results. Those who should worry could just leave everything to them. Mary screamed, retreating from the bars, pleading for them to stop. Even as she backed away, the tentacles seized her, leaving her frozen in confusion. Was this some kind of joke? Just one touch ignited a strange fire within her. Mary's cries for help were sickening. Knowing a monster like that was violating her. Beside her, Lizzie could only watch in horror. Tears streaming down her face, Mary begged for mercy, her mind too clouded to think clearly. Lizardly curled up, watching helplessly. The boss remarked on her potential. It seemed Mary had stopped resisting. No matter how mentally tough someone was, constant pressure would eventually break them into submission. Meanwhile, they'd find a way to do the same to Lizzie, who sat there, curled up. It wasn't long before she too was ensnared by the tentacles, crying out for help. And Drain soon inquired if that wasn't enough already. Suddenly, Lazuli found herself in a dark space, confused about her surroundings. She asked what was happening and where she was. Drain explained they were in the spirit realm. She was there to form a contract with him. Lazuli questioned if he could truly save her. Her real self remained outside, which posed a problem. Now, there were two options available for Lizzie Lee. The first was to leave things as they were and be sold as a slave by her captors. The second choice was to surrender her body and soul to become a true slave in his collection. He then asked her what she would decide. But Lizzie Lee was still reeling from the thought of becoming part of his collection. Faced with this dilemma, Lizzie requested a moment longer, knowing she would end up a slave one way or another. And Drain agreed, acknowledging her powerlessness in that situation. She conceded, understanding her weakness had led her to this fate. Ultimately, if she became Drain's slave, she'd just face another monster and repeat the cycle. She'd still meet a grim fate, and nothing would truly change. But Drain countered, insisting things would be different. By becoming his slave, she could gain strength. She'd gain full control over her body and soul, and in return, she would transform into a powerful human capable of punishing and eliminating the monster that had tormented her. She asked if that was genuinely true. Drain smiled and nodded. No need to worry anymore. They were nearly wasting time, so she needed to make a quick choice before it became irreversible. Time was slipping away. She had to make a choice fast, or it would be too late. At last, Lizzie Lee declared her desire to grow stronger in. The contract was presented to her. She was informed that her signature had to be given willingly. As she pressed her thumb to the document, she felt something inscribed on her skin. Drain clarified it was the mark of a slave. The protagonist bore the same emblem. It was added to his ledger of slaves. He explained it represented the bond they had formed. She had now become the inaugural member of his collection. Everything now belonged to Drain. Finally, Drain introduced himself and inquired about her name. Lizzie introduced herself as well. She bowed down at Kess's feet. Drain smiled. She truly was a good girl and snapped his fingers, urging her to rise as a new power was about to awaken within her. In the real world, an explosion erupted and Azuli's form morphed, astonishing the onlookers who couldn't comprehend the transformation. They pondered what had just transpired. It appeared she had torn the monster's tentacles apart with her bare hands in an instant. Moreover, her appearance had completely shifted. It all seemed to occur in the blink of an eye. By her looks, it seemed Lizzie had transformed into something entirely different. The protagonists grinned at this. He explained that this was the Lich Lord's energy drain ability, though Drain's version was more reckless. He could call it that too. It wasn't merely life force being drained, but rather their dignity, to be more precise. Upon hearing this, the man questioned what that truly meant. Drain was indeed a genuine monster. Yet, he wasn't going to let things remain as they were. It was still an incomplete version of the Lich's power. In other words, the girl he was about to confront was nearing the brink of becoming undead. Confronted by his sacred flame, he intended to use his power to assault Lazuli and reduce her to mere ashes. Utilizing his ability known as Astral Fire, he aimed at the girl, but Drain grinned and instructed Lizzie Lee to send them all flying. She promptly deflected his attack, leaving him in shock. The protagonist remarked that if the attack was deflected, the magic would dissipate. Then she charged at her foe, delivering knees and kicks. Her master praised her efforts. At last, he commanded her to conclude everything with a decisive strike. The slave art of 100 kicks. She sent her opponent soaring far away. Feeling the impact, the man stood frozen in disbelief. It seemed his sacred flames had no effect. His subordinate could only watch as their leader was sent flying and dreaming. He asked if the guy genuinely believed she was undead, laughing as he remarked that her current outfit was merely a personal fashion choice. Nothing more. Drain clarified that Lizzie wasn't a Zhongshi and she wasn't dead. At that moment, she was simply an ordinary human, unchanged in that respect. That caught her off guard with the protagonist noted that other bandits were still standing, so he ordered her to kick them all into the sky as well. Naturally, she was more than eager to follow Drain's commands, even as they attempted to evade her strikes. The kicks truly moved at lightning speed. Later, when Mary regained consciousness, she inquired about what was happening and what was before her. The scene was lizardly and drained in a deeply romantic moment, kissing, leaving her stunned and utterly confused. She asked what the two of them were up to. The protagonist chuckled, pleased that Mary had finally awakened. They continued their actions as if it were no big deal. This was because the more time Lizzie Lee spent with her master, the more fulfilled she felt. That must have been the sensation of being a slave. While savoring the joy of the moment, Mary, her face flushed bright red, mortified by the audacity of those two right in front of her. Finally, after the chaos at Drain's side, he hadn't anticipated how draining a slave contract could be. Merritt revisited her earlier point, acknowledging that her bond with Lazuli had enhanced her strength, enabling her to overcome her captors. Such a contract must have come at a steep cost. Perhaps they were siphoning her life force during the ordeal. Lizzie remarked that she had transformed into someone new, and it felt incredible. It filled her with genuine power. Thanks to that newfound strength, she managed to escape, and she felt immense gratitude towards her master. Mary looked genuinely astonished. She had never witnessed anything like this. She felt like she was crumbling. Even if she became that man's property, she'd likely still face humiliating situations. Moreover, Lizzie Lee was meant to be Mary's servant, but Drain cut her off before she could finish. The protagonist expressed disinterest in her thoughts, stating the only request he had was for her to sing at bedtime. It was clearly a jab, yet Lizardly quickly consented. She had an extensive collection of songs and adored singing. Drain inquired if she could genuinely do that, as it would relieve him of a burden, and he could even reward her. Mary stuttered, pleased that she was enjoying her new life in Psy, as it seemed fulfilling. It appeared that Drain had inadvertently saved her life, allowing her to leave Lizzie Lee in his care for the time being. Still, the price would be escorting her back home, and Lizzie asked her master what their next steps should be. The protagonist agreed to let her go. He still hadn't figured out what to do regarding the king. Out of nowhere, another girl approached Draying when he mentioned the king. Those who conspired against the throne would find themselves in her grasp. The wound appeared flanked by several armed knights, weapons aimed at the protagonist and his companions, for the offenses against Mary and for attempting to overthrow the royal family. Drain was to face immediate consequences. She introduced herself as the commander of the Imperial Knights, named Karen. Thus, she would be taking the protagonist into custody. Before proceeding, Karen asked if he had any final words, to which Drain replied that she seemed rather lonely. With a grin, he suggested that Karen might want to become one of his slaves. This only fueled her anger, prompting her to prepare for a fight. However, Mary urged Karen to pause because, after all, this man had saved her life. Yet Karen froze upon seeing Mary and inquired about what had transpired. Her attire was tattered, revealing far too much. Mary quickly covered herself, explaining it was the bandits' doing. They didn't need to worry since it hadn't escalated too far. Karen sighed, apologizing for the trauma. But she suggested they discuss it later. First, they needed to head back to the castle. Thus, the group set off on their journey back to the palace, as anticipated. King Harvey XI of Corbel remarked that he had received the full account directly from Karen. He expressed relief that Mary had returned safely. He was also pleased that she had returned untainted. Had she lost that, she would have been deemed unworthy of royalty and her father. Mary Bode sought forgiveness, admitting it was indeed her own negligence, while Drain simply observed. Then the king inquired about the protagonist, wanting to know who had saved his daughter's life. He also assured that Drain would be rewarded, allowing him to request anything directly from the minister later. With a smile, the protagonist asked when he had ever expressed a desire for money. There was something he desired far more than that. When Harvey asked what it was, he replied that he wanted the kingdom. He aspired to become the ruler of this land. Before Karen could draw her sword against him, he questioned if he truly intended to end his life right then. Even so, he clarified that even if he were to die, he wouldn't be able to claim the throne. Mary shouted at Drain, reminding him that he was merely a commoner and couldn't ascend to the throne. Under normal circumstances, he would have been imprisoned. It was sheer luck that her father was being lenient, so he should be very thankful. After hearing Harvey whisper something, Karen complied with her superior's orders and stated she would prepare dinner for that evening. They could all rest until then, and the protagonist was to follow the girl as she would show him to his room. Drain asked if there was a bathtub, laughing for the sake of entertainment. His slave had gotten dirty with aphrodisiac. This left Lizzie Lee feeling embarrassed, but he continued to mention how even Mary had been affected by it all. As he spoke, the princess punched Drain, silencing him for talking too much. The Eucharan was completely taken aback. Still, she resolved to prepare everything for their comfort. She seemed like a decent person. Later, in her room, she found herself alone. Her thoughts were consumed by Mary, repeating her name over and over. Despite her high status, she yearned for forgiveness for her crude fantasies. Yet, she couldn't shake the image of Mary in tattered clothes, struggling to restrain her urges. All she could think about was biting. This left Karen adrift in her own mind for a time. When she finally came to, she recalled the tentacles that had tried to touch the princess earlier, and anger surged within her for missing it. Gazing out the window, she noticed the darkness had fallen. It was time to return and fulfill her mission. Meanwhile, Drain felt quite honored. Being invited to dinner by the king was a privilege. Lizzie Lee questioned if it was appropriate for a slave to join, and he chuckled at her excitement. However, upon arriving, the protagonist noted the absence of anyone and turned to Karen. She asked the hidden figure if this was truly the dinner venue. "Have you been seen lurking in the shadows?" Karen sprang to her feet, furious, while Lizzie froze, sensing the bloodlust radiating from her. She quickly pleaded with Drain to use the earlier book. Karen sighed, frustrated by their sluggishness. With a swift motion, she unleashed a special attack, targeting both of them simultaneously with her sword. In an instant, Karen severed Drain's head. Lizzie Lee screamed in horror at the gruesome sight. Weeping in grief, Lizzie Lee heard Karen approaching and calling him a foolish man, especially for demanding a country in front of the king. This was the consequence under imperial decree. He should just accept his fate. It was unfortunate, but at least he had the chance to yell alongside her. Realizing she was now Karen's next target, Liz, Zuli froze, tears streaming down her face. Even though she felt paralyzed, Karen questioned the necessity of taking the life of a child slave who had done nothing wrong. She was just ending lives without purpose, and Karen wondered if she truly had to follow through. After dedicating herself to the sword for so long, she had become someone who obeyed orders without a second thought. Being a captain should have been a great honor, a source of pride for those who believed in her. Yet, the king had commanded her to take lives. Karen pondered her hesitation. This was all for her country, after all. She shouldn't feel shame. This was also a fight for Mary. And so, she lunged at Lizzie Lee, who remained there, still sobbing. But suddenly something seized her arm and Karen collapsed to the ground. Unable to reach Lizzie Lee, she realized what had transpired. A tentacle had ensnared her. This was dire. She couldn't muster her strength. A different woman appeared, laughing, claiming Karen was full of vulnerabilities to exploit. It was absurd that she was discarding her name in a realm of esteemed swordmasters, despite being the imperial captain. It was unimaginable that someone in such a noble position would actually take the life of an innocent slave. The girl laughed as she approached, vowing to render Karen's mind blank, turning her into a new puppet. Karen demanded to know who she was, and the woman chuckled. She introduced herself as Adefa, the leader of the Lord of Candelabrum. Karen quickly recognized it as a cult. She explained that her cult consisted of followers of the god of distortion, Coronil, who would be resurrected if they fulfilled his grand desires. With powerful individuals like Karen, it was all for their master, Karenu. Karen found herself restrained, and Adifa laughed at her predicament, relishing every moment of her reactions. She wondered if Karen engaged in similar activities when alone, infuriating Karen for being exposed like that. Karen genuinely wished to find a way to end her life after this was over, which only delighted Adife further. Yet, this was a reality that would not come to pass, and Defa continued to hold her opponent down as she writhed. Addie claimed she could relax because she would make her feel so good that she wouldn't need to think about anything else in this world, despite her resistance. Karen realized there was nothing she could do to escape the situation she had found herself in. Moreover, the tentacles also ensnared Lizuli, as Aditha intended to make her a sacrifice in the same manner. Realizing this, Lizuli panicked and began pleading for assistance, begging Drain to save her life once more. That was the moment both girls materialized in the Soul Realm, instructed to express their true desires. Now, they merely needed to respond to Drain, as it appeared they met all the requirements. In disbelief, Karen questioned the nature of this place and the whereabouts of those tentacles. Her clothes had vanished too. Moreover, she couldn't grasp how Drain was still alive. She smiled at him effortlessly. Lizzie wept with relief, thrilled that the protagonist was still alive. Drain chuckled, asking if he had caused her worry, assuring her everything was all right. Losing his head wouldn't mean his demise. A lot had transpired that night, and the slave felt pride, just as she anticipated from her master. Noticing Karen's bewilderment, Drain commented that despite everything, the skilled swordswoman seemed to be in a tight spot. Fury ignited within her as she labeled him a monster. The king was justified in issuing the execution order she had executed. Even without her weapons or attire, her fists remained, and she intended to use them to end him. Still, Adrian inquired if he should opt for the less painful choice. He opened his book, gesturing toward his sleeve. Then, he made Lizzie Lee transform right before Karen's eyes. She regained her outfit and powers once more, standing before her master. Her body and soul belonged to Drain, who urged her to unleash everything her master commanded, swiftly taking down Karen. Lizzie Lee knocked Karen to the ground, declaring that such disrespect towards her master was utterly unforgivable. The knight was left in shock, unable to fathom how Lizardly had become so formidable. But Drain reminded her that she should have anticipated this. He had crafted that space to forge his own contracts. For now, Karen was secure within it. However, he wanted to know if she preferred to be his slave or merely a puppet for one of the cultists in the real world. Those were her only two choices. That cultist had undoubtedly taken the lives of many innocent people. Still, he doubted Karen could handle such a burden, and she vehemently declared she never would. That was precisely what Drain had anticipated. If she became this slave, like Lizzie Lee, she'd finally gain true power, even more than she possessed now. Drain even promised to etch Karen's name into history as a legendary swordswoman. Feeling anxious, she wondered how he could possibly know. This mirrored what had occurred with Mary earlier. That was because in the past, Karen had expressed to Mary her desire to become a swordswoman, and Mary had been astonished that even as a woman, she had become the strongest in the nation. Karen had trained diligently, but Mary dismissed her efforts. She referred to it as Trigio. Being recognized as #1 in a small country was absurd. If possible, she should strive to be the greatest in the world. That would be far superior. A swordswoman so talented she could carve her name into future generations, into history itself. If a swordswoman like that served Mary, her worth would soar. And that's why the princess depended on her captain's support. At that moment, Karen had been taken aback. She had never considered leaving her mark on history, but she certainly remembered it. The spark of Reagan had simply fallen. The path of the sword had become a dream to earn her place beside Mary. And now, Karen had become a woman of the king, committing unspeakable acts. It seemed she had strayed far from her sword's path. In tears, Karen confessed her desire to grow stronger, but she questioned if any dignity remained for her to achieve that. With a smile, Drain replied that he would transform Karen into his pride. His slave would rise to be the greatest swordswoman of all time. Now that would be something truly noble. Yet Karen continued to weep, unable to believe she was hearing such words from him. She apologized to Mary, realizing she would ultimately sell herself to this man, and then Drain asked if she had made her choice. Presenting the contract before her, he instructed her to sign. It had to be done of her own volition, and Karen complied. Thus, the mark of the slave was etched onto her body. She became Drain's second slave. He introduced himself as Drain and asked for her name, to which she responded, Karen. Kissing his foot, she vowed to serve him with all her might. Reality fractured, and Karen's transformation unfolded once more. Leaving Adifa bewildered, unable to grasp what had just transpired in an instant, the figure that had appeared was now the slave Karen who swiftly obliterated Adifa's tentacles. Adifa pondered what was happening. Suddenly, the knight's appearance had shifted entirely. Beside her, Dring grinned. She truly was impressive. His new slave and Adifa was taken aback to find him still breathing. His head may have flown off, but it was evident Drain wasn't entirely human. Lizardly requested orders to punish Adifa, fueled by her disdain for those tentacle abilities. That was the way it ought to be. The hero would ensure anyone who mistreated his slaves faced consequences. Adifa laughed. Drain appeared to possess unusual techniques. Yet it wasn't entirely negative. Still, those methods wouldn't work on her. The cultist assault hit her adversary, yet she had no trouble obliterating all of them simultaneously. Leaving the cultists in shock, Lazuli declared this would be the true retribution for her actions. She struck Adifa, but to her dismay, the prize had no impact. It merely amused Adifil with the immense power they wielded. It was undoubtedly a formidable warrior-type attack, but sadly ineffective. Adifa's connection with that minion type was poor, prompting her to summon a gigantic stone golem. Adifor grinned, stating this golem was crafted from her magical energy. Its body was as tough as adamantite. No attack could penetrate its armor. It was truly unfortunate for her weaker opponents. Adifa commanded the golem to charge at her foes. The bodies could still serve a purpose once everything concluded. While Lizardly remained silent, simply observing, it was Karen who instructed her to step back. She took a step back herself, preparing. Mildly surprised, Adifa noticed Karen's fighting style was distinct. Its power radiated, visible to those nearby. Intrigued, Karen amplified her powers, unleashing an explosion around her. This triggered the awakening of renew abilities. She used her sword against the stone golem, cleaving its body in two with a single strike. Astonishingly, Karen sliced through the golem's body effortlessly, letting its fragments tumble to the ground. Moments later, Adifa's arm went flying. Yet, she showed no reaction, merely exhaling. It seemed she had misjudged Drain's true strength, who simply smiled as he observed his slave's battle. For now, she would withdraw, but her interest in these individuals had genuinely piqued. They would undoubtedly cross paths again. With a blast, the cultists disappeared, and Karen realized she had managed to escape despite everything. Drain remarked it wasn't quite like that, and truthfully, he could have let them go. Regardless, it was sufficient. He affectionately patted Karen's head, commending her performance and expressing pride. She blushed and turned away, leaving Lizardly surprised. But soon after, both of them collapsed to the ground, and Drain sensed it was beginning again. Legally, she immediately embraced the protagonist and kissed him. This left Karen utterly bewildered by the abruptness. Yet Lizzie Lee understood that Karen should be experiencing the same feelings now. This was all due to the contract with Drain, which drained much of their vitality. Now that Karen was a new slave, she should be feeling the same sensations Lizzie Lee experienced. The needs and responses mirrored each other. Anxiously, Karen realized she would have to do the same with Drain as Lizwilly had. Even if it was more than a bit embarrassing, engaging in such acts felt excessive, but Lizzo chuckled, noting Karen seemed shy about revealing her desires. Then she tugged on the chain of Karen's collar, drawing her closer, and they both ended up serving their master. With that, Lizzie reassured her, stating there was no reason to feel embarrassed. They should take pride in serving their master. When Karen touched Drain's face, a surge of sensations coursed through her. Her vitality began to return as she drew near to her master. She couldn't allow Mary to see her like this, but the skin-to-skin contact and the accompanying sensations were overwhelming. Everything flowing from Drain directly replenished her vitality. It only intensified her desire to serve him. In that moment, Karen understood she had genuinely become a true slave. It took a while for them to finish. When it concluded, Drain sighed, utterly exhausted. It had been even more draining than the last time. Lizzie Liley laughed, mentioning that she and Karen had ended up clashing a bit, but she then asked what their next move should be. Drain was puzzled, prompting Lizzie Lee to suggest they should leave quickly. However, Karen struggled to voice her thoughts, leading Drain to inquire if she could simply stay by the princess's side for the time being. Even taken aback, Karen listened as the protagonist proposed that since she was already his slave, she could be summoned from his book whenever necessary. This made Karen deeply appreciative, and Lazuli recognized Drain's genuine kindness. It was truly a positive thing. Then Karen suggested that if they had nowhere else to go, they could head to her hometown. Legetto was an autonomous region ruled by a powerful saint. The king wouldn't pursue them, especially to such a remote area. After contemplating the saint's idea, Drain agreed it seemed like a solid plan, and they began to prepare for their departure. Meanwhile, a certain creature struggled to cross a troublesome barrier set by the very same saint, who turned out to be a girl. He was furious but determined to break free soon, and at the same time, fury coursed through him, but he planned to escape shortly. At the same time, as they journeyed toward the city, Lizzie Lee and Drain had been walking for quite some time, yet the saint's residence remained out of sight. The protagonist couldn't shake the thought of meeting a saint, envisioning her as his next servant. Suddenly, he collapsed, prompting Lizzie Lee to turn back, her concern evident as she rushed to check on him. He realized that since arriving in this realm, his life force had been continuously sapped. Weakness was inevitable. If he continued in this state, Drayton might even perish, which shocked Lazuli. She expressed her regret to Drain, claiming it was her fault for pushing him too hard after so many transformations. Yet Lizzie Lee felt helpless to restore his vitality, and he muttered about his hunger. Meanwhile, at the church in Legato, a cough broke the silence as someone began conversing with a girl named Remilia. The man mentioned he had managed to acquire some healing medicine, albeit temporary, and urged Remilia to use it. Grateful, the girl thanked him for his generosity, though she found it hard to believe she would use something so precious. The man smiled, asking her what she meant. If their prayers didn't hold the barrier, monsters would soon invade. This made Remilia crucial to Legato. It was for the saint's sake, and they had no regrets. After taking the medicine, Remilia questioned how much longer she could endure her illness after all these years. The man replied that if the fairy water elixir existed, her ailment might be treatable. However, Emilia understood that relying on a fairy tale that likely didn't exist was futile. Thus, Remilia Klaas joined her hands in prayer, pleading for the protection of those lands. Her magic surged in response. Meanwhile, Li Zhu Li was busy preparing a dish, her pride evident in her smile. She assured him it would be ready shortly. Cooking was her true talent, after all. Even without knowing the herb's name, adding it to the food was supposed to enhance the flavor, and Drain observed in silence. Since Lazuli aimed to impress her master, she wanted to create something more extravagant, incorporating local fruits, and arranged everything on his plate. The protagonist watched as she finished preparing a bowl of rice brimming with ingredients for him. He picked up the plate, astonished. It was indeed the dish she had envisioned, and it exceeded his expectations. With a smile, Lizzie mentioned that since he was so famished, she had prepared something in advance, hoping he would enjoy it. As Drain took his first bite, he was taken aback. He froze, staring at Lazuli. It dawned on him that this was likely the only type of dish she had ever made. The meal was bland and tasteless, but he realized that as Mary's servant, she had probably subsisted on this her entire life. Still, he expressed gratitude for the meal, vowing that once they reached the city, he would treat her to something delicious at a restaurant. Overjoyed, she asked if that was truly the case, thanking her master for the offer. After their meal that night, the protagonist expressed his thanks. He finished every last bite without a single complaint. Now, with a full stomach, it was time to continue their journey, and the girl agreed as she packed away her cooking supplies. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air from a distance. A girl was in distress. Tentacles ensnared her from all sides, holding her captive as she cried out for help, unable to escape. While she endured this horrifying ordeal, Lizzie Lee spotted the chaos and was the first to rush over. With Drain allowing her to transform, she obliterated the tentacles restraining the girl, successfully saving her. She approached the girl, asking if she was all right, though the girl still appeared a bit dazed from the ordeal. The girl thanked them for their rescue. Drain inquired why a woman was alone in the forest at such a late hour. She explained that the great sage of the forest appeared around this time. Lizu Li probed further. The girl revealed she had a sick daughter, and fairy water was the only remedy for her illness. She needed to find a cure quickly. Being a saint drained her life force even faster than usual. Upon hearing about the saint, Zule was taken aback, and the protagonist mentioned they were also heading to the city where the saint resided. It was perilous to be alone in the forest, so Drain suggested the woman join them for a while, hoping to meet the saint if possible. The woman agreed, seemingly unbothered by the idea. A little later, while Lizzie Lee was preoccupied with kissing and aiding him in regaining his strength, the woman understood these two were far from ordinary. They had the audacity to act like that right in front of a stranger in the woods. Yet, the protagonist reassured her not to fret about them. It was merely his method of channeling energy to his contracted slaves. If she became one, the same could be done for her. The woman was taken aback by the thought of being compelled to do such things with Drain. She declined mentioning her daughter. This was utterly abnormal, yet Drain and Lizzie Lee remained silent as she spiraled into her thoughts. Snapping back to reality, the woman realized she was lost in her own imagination. She bolted, recalling they needed to hurry to find the forest sage. It didn't take long for them to spot a house likely belonging to the sage, and she felt relief at their arrival. Suddenly a voice called out, recognizing her. It was Ophelia, the mother of the saint. She was welcomed warmly and invited inside. As the group drew closer and entered the dwelling, affiliates mentioned she had received a letter from the great sage Navarre. He confirmed it was true. Navarre expressed regret for contacting the saint's mother so late. He had learned of the saint's declining health, and the affiliates agreed that was indeed the situation. Philia explained her daughter was weakening daily, yet she continued to pray for the city as part of her saintly duties. For Ophelia, it was painful to witness her daughter endure such suffering. Nevers understood how incredibly tough that must be. He presented her with a legendary, exceedingly rare item, something only he possessed. It was called fairy water. This medicine could cure any ailment. The saint's illness would surely vanish once she consumed it. Ophelia inquired if it was truly acceptable to take something so precious, and the sage consented. It was pointless for him to keep it when she could create a brighter future with it. Tearfully, she thanked Never for his immense kindness, and he urged her to return soon. The saint was undoubtedly waiting for her. She agreed and prepared to leave with Drain, but he lingered behind, lost in contemplation, which left Ophelia puzzled. The protagonist inquired if Never was one of them as well. The sage questioned what the boy meant by that. Drain dismissed it and chose to depart. He was merely curious about meeting the saint, nothing more. Leaving the stage behind, alone he never realized that Drain was indeed a perilous individual, having seen through the facade. After all, the true Nevers had perished, and something else had taken his place, masquerading as him. Meanwhile, the group pressed on, but Ophelia struggled visibly to keep pace, prompting Lizzie Lee to ask if she was all right. Buono replied she was usually fine and the city was close, even though she felt fatigued from the journey. Legend should have appeared normal. Yet something felt off. That's when Tria noticed a barrier encircling the city. It explained that it was part of the Sync's prayer. No monster could breach that boundary. She demonstrated how to pass through the barrier, and Lizzie Lee followed. But she grew perplexed when Drang didn't join them. She asked what was wrong, but Drain brushed it off, attempting to cross the barrier, only to be forcefully repelled. Liz decided to check on Traim to see if he was all right. While affiliates wondered what this could signify, the saint's prayer was intended to repel anything abnormal and aligned with evil, yet it seemed Drain truly was something else, as Lazuli fretted over her master, asking if he was okay. From the protagonist's perspective, it was quite a hassle. It appeared he had to shrink down to enter the city, so Drain began to transform into his child form. Both women were taken aback, but Lizzie Lee merely thought it was somewhat adorable, though she focused on asking if he was all right. Ephelio still grasped nothing. Drain had rejuvenated purely by will. Clearly, he wasn't an ordinary human. The protagonist clarified that the barrier had repelled the power of the Lich Lord, which was why he had been thrown back. That's why he couldn't do anything in that state. Yet, despite Lizzie Lee's surprise, she asked if they should now concentrate on locating the saint. Drain agreed, as Ophelia was eager to deliver the medicine to her daughter as swiftly as possible. Though confused, she consented. Despite everything, Drain still seemed like a decent person. If Philly dashed to the church to bring the medicine to her ailing daughter, she felt a surge of hope that this might finally heal her. Remilia turned her head at the sound of her mother's voice, recognizing it. Ophelia was worn out from her sprint. She mentioned she had secured medicine from the forest's great sage. The man at the church felt a wave of relief. It appeared she had indeed acquired the legendary fairy water. Who would have thought it was real? Ophelia handed the potion to her daughter, assuring her it would help. She urged her to drink it all. Remilia, still in disbelief, understood her mother had gone through so much for her, even as Ophelia pressed her to drink quickly. Before long, Remilia consumed the medicine and Ophelia felt a rush of joy. Her daughter should be safe now. The girl chuckled, insisting it wouldn't be that simple. Then, she suddenly began to cough up a significant amount of blood. She collapsed onto the floor. Ophelia gasped in shock, demanding to know what was happening. She felt helpless, watching her daughter in such distress. Blood pooled around them, and she pleaded for someone to heal her, desperate to save her child's life. The man beside her grimly noted the situation was dire. The sink's power was fading fast. Without it, the barrier would start to crumble until it shattered completely. Suddenly, the anticipated laughter never came, leaving everyone delighted that everything had finally reached its conclusion. In the city, confusion spread as the agent appeared out of nowhere, but people felt relief. After all, he was a good soul. They had been anxious due to Never's recent absence, but then tentacles began to slither out from his robes. The sage chuckled, claiming that if they were referring to him, he had perished long ago. From his form emerged a colossal creature that laughed after claiming the life of the true sage. As his real form materialized, screams erupted from the crowd. Meanwhile, chaos continued to unfold in the church. A nun rushed in, begging for assistance. A monster was rampaging through the city. It was barreling toward the cathedral at a terrifying pace. If it wasn't stopped soon, all would be lost. But soon, the nun was swiftly captured. While the nun faced that dire situation, the group remained somewhat stunned by the unfolding events. Then the great beast reached the cathedral, laughing as he had finally returned, shattering the barrier that had held him back. Ophelia recognized the monster as baseless, and Drain smiled, realizing he had been right to identify him earlier. It was rare to see those chemicals take over someone. It appeared the imposter posing as the sage had infiltrated the cathedral. Basilisk laughed, noting that the protagonist had figured it out quickly, despite his drastically altered appearance. Nevera then disclosed that he had already taken the life of the previous great sage. This left Ophelia in shock. She questioned what the fairy water she had given her daughter was, realizing she had actually handed over a form of poison instead of a remedy. Drain inquired about Basilisk's intentions, to which he replied that the heartbeat of Gallinau was sealed within this cathedral. Now that he had entered the city, he aimed to unleash it. It seemed the saint had only complicated his path to success. Nearby, Remilia coughed, urging her mother to flee, but Ophelia refused to abandon her in such a state. Basilisk questioned if she truly believed she could escape this. Suddenly, the churchman's body froze completely. This was Basilisk's formidable power, the ability to paralyze his foes. If left like this, it would inevitably lead to death, just like all the other humans who had met the same fate. Soon, Lizzie Lee called out for Drain as well. Meanwhile, Basilisk pondered whether he should drain the vitality from that woman. After all, those were always the most desirable. He attacked Ophelia while holding Remilia hostage, instructing her to watch closely what would happen if she didn't surrender the key he sought. Her mother would lose her life and vitality right before her eyes, and so Basilisk began his grim task. He laughed, relishing the sight of the daughter witnessing her mother in such a wretched state, writhing in his grip. Remilia apologized, but she insisted she couldn't comply with his demands, prompting Basilisk to laugh. He claimed to have escalated things, applying a potent aphrodisiac to Ophelia, intensifying the drain on her vitality through his own abilities. Regardless, they had no plans to surrender the key, scoffing at her as if she were trying to appear strong in front of her daughter. He relentlessly mocked Ophelia, while Remilia wept for her mother. Her mother urged her to stay calm and concentrate on her mission. Basilisk chuckled, watching Ophelia's disgrace unfold before the saint, her own daughter powerless to intervene. She needed to witness her mother's downfall. Her vitality was swiftly being siphoned away as time slipped by. Time dragged on until she began to fade. Basilisk taunted her, asking if she had lost the strength to scream. She would perish unless someone intervened. It was a horrifying sight, impossible to look away from. If only someone like that could be captured as a slave, everything would be resolved. But Drain was powerless in that place. At that moment, Remilia finally admitted that the key was her heart. In tears, she pleaded with him not to take her mother's life. He responded that it was an excellent choice. Now he could satisfy his desires. But she would be next. He would claim her heart while her mother watched helplessly. Lizzie Lee shouted for him to halt, but Basilisk paid her no mind. He commanded Remilia to scream in agony loud enough for all to hear. Meanwhile, the girl expressed gratitude to her mother for the medicine and everything she had done, even if it all ended in tragedy. She professed her love for her mother just before Basilisk struck, and then the three girls found themselves in the Shadow Realm. Train wondered if they were in serious trouble, confused by the situation. Ephilia questioned where they were, but Lizzie smiled, knowing precisely their location. Drain mentioned he had lost some of his power. This wasn't a typical contract, but she needed to be ready. Still, Lazuli approached him, relieved to see he was safe. She inquired if he meant purification, and he replied that his resistance was 0, while his nature stood at 11. That had to mean something positive, as Lizzie Lee was thrilled to hear it after everything. Meanwhile, Remilia asked where they were, and if. Ephilia rushed to embrace her daughter, realizing she was still alive. Drain asked if she was okay, noting this might be a bit different from the norm. This realm was a fragment of his mind, crafted to forge contracts. Once they exited, everything would revert to normal, just like reality. The two Burrows were stunned by this revelation, but the protagonist reassured them he could rescue them. He could save all of them, however. They would need to offer him their bodies, hearts, and dignity to gain strength. The condition was to become his slave. If they refused, the saint would perish. But Remilia responded that it was fine. She felt no fear as long as she was with her mother, causing Ephilia to weep at her daughter's words. Drain noticed she was beginning to comprehend, but the issue was that at that moment, he lacked access to his slave powers. He needed to draw strength from someone else. Stokey approached the saint's mother, able to siphon vitality from her. After all, Ephilia was the saint's mother and still held considerable strength. Meanwhile, Remilia's life force was far too delicate. With his power restored, he could turn them into his slaves instantly. However, Lazuli objected, asking if it couldn't just be done with her alone. Drain replied that Lizzie Lee was already his slave, so nothing would change, leaving her visibly upset. There was still a chance to use Remilia if she fully refused. But the girl trembled at the thought, so the mother consented and allowed him to proceed. Having raised Remilia, she felt she was the most suitable for the task. With that, Drain agreed and began to draw from her. Even though Philia felt anxious about it, she allowed it to happen, even in front of a child. Regardless of everything, it all began with Drain. Ephilia struggled to grasp the emotion. It felt as if her vitality was slipping away. She sensed herself fading. It felt unusual, almost pleasant, like she was weightless. Next to her, Remilia could only observe as Ephilia expressed regret for exposing her to such a sight. Yet it was all for her daughter's benefit. And soon, Drain would complete his task. When he rose, Remilia was taken aback to see Drain revert to his adult form, baffled by the transformation. Lazole clarified that this was Drain's authentic form and purpose. I offered a somewhat grim smile, uncertain of how to respond. Then Drain moved forward with the contract, intending to bind them as his slaves. He presented the documents for them to sign willingly. After a brief pause, both girls complied with Drain's request. They committed body and soul, ready to offer everything they possessed. For Drain, it was a stunning sight, and now they could unveil their true selves in reality. Basilisk stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. Yet, if Philly smiled, she radiated vitality. She had never realized such a version of herself existed. She urged Remilia to follow her heart, and she agreed. Now the real battle was about to commence. Remilius claimed Basilisk had committed a truly heinous act, and now they were prepared to retaliate fully. Even in that form, Ephilia sensed her daughter had matured significantly. It was as if she had suddenly transformed into a genuine adult. However, as a saint, her new appearance starkly contrasted her title. Drain informed Basilisk that the Tuta would become his slaves. Faced with that, essentially, he questioned whether he was truly the one responsible for such actions. But Remilia quickly captured his focus. She prepared to shoot. As he was looking the wrong direction, she fired her first strike at her foe. She laughed, exhilarated by the thrill of the attack. But Basilisk was growing more and more annoyed. The sacred power shot from the past was dangerously close. He barely managed to defend with his stone-like scales. Now he readied to assault Remilia with dark smoke, aiming to petrify her. So Remilia took off on her motorcycle, a creation bestowed by her mother, who was part of that entity. Remilia expressed her gratitude to Ophelia for it. That's when Basilisk chose to take Drain hostage. After all, slaves couldn't just abandon their master. The protagonist apologized for raising his hopes, but ultimately, transformation was also one of Drain's abilities. Thus, Basilisk planned to attack and end the protagonist's life, hoping that would eliminate his other foes. He also aimed to thwart her enemy, but her motorcycle still refused to budge. She inquired of her mother what was happening, and Ophelia replied that there were moments like this when she needed to remain calm. After all, they just had to trust Drain. Everything would turn out fine. Even Basilisk was perplexed, since neither purification nor poison affected him. Ophelia urged Remilia to concentrate on attacking. She was likely holding back due to concern for her mother's safety, but the mother reassured her she would be all right. In fact, it seemed it would be a bit challenging, and she found a certain enjoyment in situations like this. Meanwhile, Basilisk grew furious and prepared to take Drain's life and Remilia. She realized she could no longer restrain herself. As expected of her daughter, Ophelia witnessed the moment she needed to act to defeat her adversary. It was better to fight than to pray. True to her lineage, Ophelia recognized the instant she had to step in and confront her foe, action over prayer. And true to her feelings, she believed this was the correct path. They thought violence would resolve everything. Rushing at Basilisk, they charged forward, convinced this was truly the best option. They landed a hit on Basilisk's head. The familiar chuckled, reveling in the moment. It had been ages since her mother experienced such joy. Yet, once it concluded, their bodies began to shake, and Drain clarified it was part of the slave agreement. Something even more significant awaited them. With Basil finally defeated, they could converse freely again. Remilia inquired about how this would proceed, and the protagonist answered that they needed to draw the power they had just utilized from him. Feeling a bit anxious, Remilia could only wait, and Drain sensed she wasn't accustomed to this. Regardless, they had both put in considerable effort, and it was something the protagonist could offer as a reward. They had performed admirably. Still, as Remilia hesitated, questioning if it was truly acceptable, Drain extended his hand to present her reward. So, they shared a kiss, while Remilia was still trying to grasp what was unfolding. The sensation was undeniably pleasurable. It was the reward her body craved after having all her energy sapped during the fight. Now she could reclaim it from her master. Ophelia was pleased that Remilia had also recovered, but Remilia insisted her mother deserved the same. After all, she had worked hard for it too, and they should relish the reward together. Drain concurred and managed to reverse the transformation, returning her to her normal human state. Now she could move freely again, and Drain told her she could come closer to receive the compensation for her body. Ophelia mentioned that despite her lack of experience, she was eager for it, and so she also accepted the same from Drain. It was the genuine happiness emanating from Drain as a reward for their struggles on his behalf. When it concluded, they both returned to being ordinary people. The protagonist slumped down, utterly exhausted. Beside him, Basilisk remarked that they had underestimated his resilience. They had let their guard down after injuring him. If he could obtain Lord Gereno's heartbeat, he would survive this ordeal and grow even stronger. They needed to brace for what lay ahead. This time, he planned to take everything from them and inflict a despair worse than death. However, Lizzie Lee was the first to stomp on his body just as he was about to move, realizing she was right to keep an eye on him. It was clear he was attempting to stir up trouble again, and Basilisk seethed with anger that the other sleigh had figured it out so quickly. She was impressed that he was still alive after everything, so she unleashed a power that left Basilisk bewildered. The energy was truly magnificent, and Lizzie Lee felt immense strength emanating from the beautiful energy she held. Basilisk's fury grew as he realized what it was, and demanded to know if she understood how long it took him to acquire it. Nevertheless, she chose to seize it now. It could prove beneficial for her master's future endeavors. Basilisk questioned if she even grasped her actions, but Lizzie Lee retorted that at the very least, she knew he was incredibly weak without it. Clearly, he couldn't even sustain his own life without it. This was his new punishment for his heinous deeds. "You should just lie there and perish like a dog," she said, turning to leave as Basilius began to dissolve until he vanished completely. Across the city, all the people who had been petrified returned to normal, astonished by the events that had just transpired. Then Nephilia and Remilia expressed their gratitude to Thrain for rescuing their kingdom, and as a saint, she wished to convey her appreciation. The city also wanted to thank the protagonist and inquired if they could offer him anything. Ben pondered for a moment before responding that he would like to establish a base, and the others reflected on that. Remilia lamented, stating they would make the city of Legato his headquarters, and everyone bowed to honor the new ruler of their nation. Even with concerns from the other church officials, Remilia replied that it was acceptable because this country had been neglected for far too long. It was time for independence, and in the distance, Adifa found everything a bit odd and laughed, questioning if that serpent had truly erred. In the kingdom, Lizzie Lee beamed with joy, having received stunning new garments. He laughed heartily, pondering how long it had been since she last crafted clothing. She was thrilled that Lazuli appreciated the outfit. Grateful, Lizzie Lee expressed her thanks, recalling how she had only worn the same attire from her days as Mary's servant. It must have been tough to hear that she had been in rags. But for Lizzie Lee, it was all good. She was no longer a drained slave, and that brought her immense joy. Since it was a special occasion, Ophelia proposed they cook something, and Lizzie Lee was thrilled by the suggestion. Meanwhile, the protagonist conversed with Remilia. She realized he was searching for shelter. Mary's father had ordered his execution after he expressed a desire to claim the nation. With Captain Karen's help from the Royal Guard, he had made it this far. There was also the mysterious cult leader pursuing them. Remilia inquired about Drain's next steps. He responded that things had settled down, and he intended to embark on another journey to find more slaves for his group, until he could finish his book. Then Remilia asked how many he planned to enslave, and he realized it was a significant number, 100 people. Remilia was taken aback. He clarified that he aimed to establish a nation entirely of slaves, allowing him to become a true king in Remilian. She questioned the purpose behind creating such a nation. He paused to reflect. Recalling his father's words about building a kingdom of the dead on earth, he realized he was merely following the teachings of his childhood. He candidly admitted he was destined to be a king, a dream his parents had for him. Remilia understood that ambition must run deep. She apologized for her odd comments. Bowing, she stated that obeying her master's commands should be their priority, and she regretted her presumptuous questions. Regardless, Drain Meltdown expressed gratitude for her wise counsel, which helped him grasp the world better, and he would seriously contemplate the meaning of establishing a country. Remilia felt elated to hear her master acknowledge that. Suddenly, Lazuli burst in, announcing that dinner was ready. Everyone gathered to sit together at the same table, a true feast spread before them. Ophelia mentioned that it was Lizzie Lee who had requested help with cooking, and she had learned a lot over time from cooking with others. While cooking this time, she discovered something significant. Salt truly enhanced the flavor of dishes. Concerned, Remilia asked what kind of food she had been eating until now, and Lizzie sighed, clearly aware of her difficult past. In any case, she urged everyone to enjoy the meal. The protagonist was the first to sample the food. Knowing she had struggled with cooking before, he quickly declared it excellent. This made both Lizzie Lee and Ophelia very happy. She had also contributed to some dishes and sought praise. So, a fair approach to feeding. Drain praised her dishes, and she helped him eat plenty to regain his strength. Nearby, Remilia mentioned her own cooking skills, asking if he would like to try her food when the chance arose. Of course, Drain replied affirmatively, which delighted her. Then, Ophelia mentioned she had prepared a bath for him after the meal, emphasizing the need for rest after their ordeals. Naturally, she wanted to wash his back and take care of her master properly. Lizzie Lee quickly offered her assistance, eager to support him wholeheartedly. Even though Remilia felt embarrassed just thinking about it, she grew anxious at the idea of seeing him during the bath, realizing they would all be too exposed. Drain sensed he was getting involved in something intriguing. It sounded like fun. So it was fine after all. He'd be surrounded by all his slaves. However, the thought of managing 100 slaves later seemed utterly exhausting. He wasn't even sure he could handle it. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a true catastrophe unfolded before Edifice's eyes, with people perishing after being pushed to their limits. Someone questioned if she was really going to repeat this, and Adifa laughed, warning them to be cautious of a man named Drain, who enslaved women. Still, the other girl was unfazed, as there was someone else capable of turning people into slaves who couldn't be defeated. Meanwhile, the girls leisurely stepped into the enormous bath of that house, ready to enjoy some relaxing time together. The girls leisurely made their way into the massive bath of the house, ready to unwind and enjoy each other's company. Ophelia shared that this site was once a sacred space for rituals filled with water, but now it served a unique purpose. Unlike ordinary baths, firestones sourced from a dragon's breath heated the water. These gems were rare and valuable, making hot water a luxury for the affluent. When asked for his opinion, Rain remarked that it was quite pleasant. He assured them he could manage just fine, even with everyone crowding around him. Nevertheless, Lizzie Lee and Ophelia insisted on helping, claiming it was voluntary, so there was no need for concern. At a distance, Ramilia stood frozen in embarrassment, apologizing for being unable to assist her master, too shy to approach the group in the bath. Suddenly, Lizzie had a thought and felt a wave of relief. The scar from Drain's past had vanished after the horrific injury he once endured. It was his first experience in such a large bath, and Drain explained that his parents, being leeches, avoided water as it was toxic to them. Ophelius insisted they needed to change that quickly and ensured Drain stayed clean. This was a far cry from his life with his parents in the Old Kingdom. Still, he found this experience enjoyable. The girls were having a great time, even while sharing the bath and washing together. Dre thought it would be wonderful to create something similar in his own castle, and Lizzie agreed. It truly was nice allowing everyone to spend more time together. For that to happen, the location needed to be special, but suddenly, Dre noticed a mark on Lizzie Lee's neck, right at the nape beneath her hair. Ophelia abruptly stood up. She inquired about when Lizzie had acquired that mark, leaving her puzzled, as she hadn't noticed anything amiss until now. However, both Ophelia and Ramilia recognized it immediately, explaining it was a sign of the black fumarole disease, and they were concerned about how long it had been there. Drain asked what that meant, but Ophelia had no choice but to confine Lazuli in a carriage to send her away to a remote location. She expressed her regret, stating she had to take such action. The mark on Lizzie Lee's neck was extremely dangerous, and they needed to act swiftly before it worsened. This was part of an outbreak known as the Black Fumarole Disease. Recently, symptoms had begun to surface in various cities. They couldn't yet determine if it was a disease or a curse. The transmission method remained a mystery, so extreme caution was essential. What they did know was that this mark was associated with the infected, and the mortality rate was 0.01, indicating it was likely very lethal. Those afflicted had to report to the authorities for mandatory isolation, otherwise, more people would suffer. The guards expressed their gratitude for the information and confirmed that it was indeed the Black Fumarole Disease that Ophelia had suspected during the bath. If they didn't quarantine her, the entire nation could be at risk, as the disease could spread uncontrollably and cause widespread suffering. However, both Lizzie and Drain found themselves under that obligation, and he would accompany her, even if it meant being taken to a completely different place. The national institution, the Institute of Magical Research and Development, would ensure Lizzie received protection and treatment. They could manage whatever was happening. Ramilia questioned if it was truly acceptable for things to unfold this way, and her mother replied that there was nothing they could do to halt it now. Rumors circulated that the institute had a priest who might have found a cure for this alleged disease, so they should trust him to handle the situation. She felt anxious about sending Drain and the others away, but they had no choice but to rely on the priest. Ophelia believed it would be an even greater issue if it were discovered later and reported incorrectly. This way, they could prevent further complications and involvement. Drain and Lizzie Lee's names wouldn't be dragged into more trouble, so they decided to use false identities to avoid any issues with the kingdom. This would keep them safe from Hardy, who would recognize them just by their names, which could easily spread. For now, they would remain secure. After everything, even though Lizzie Lee was being isolated, the protagonist chose to accompany her. She would feel lonely alone, and he intended to stay by her side until the end. He would be fine. No illness or curse could directly affect Drain, so he would be okay staying beside Lizzie Lee, no matter where they ended up. With that, Ophelia could only pray for the safety of her master and Lizzie Lee as they departed in the carriage toward a distant place, far from the kingdom they had known until now. Lazuli cried, apologizing to Drain for how things had turned out, but he reassured her that it was all right. It wasn't her fault that events had unfolded this way. Suddenly, the carriage came to a halt. They were unceremoniously thrown out. The protagonist complained about how harshly they were treated. One of the guards yelled, questioning what Drain was even talking about. After all, they were expected to work until they dropped in this place. Upon stepping out of the carriage, they realized they had been brought to a different location where numerous slaves were gathered to toil. Not only Lazuli, but Drain himself had become a slave in this place, their necks shackled with chains to keep them restrained. Most alarmingly, the protagonist recognized that the chains possessed some power, preventing him from using his abilities to escape the dire situation.